Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this second session on the Iran conflict. Yesterday, we had studied about the history of political and economic interference by Western countries in Iran over the last 100 to 125 years. Now, today, we'll study the nuclear weapons aspect of this conflict in detail. In order to understand that, again, we have to go back in history. And it was in 1953 that the United States, under the then President David Dwight Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, had started what was known as the Atoms for Peace program, under which it was going to teach, or it was going to train scientists and students from other countries regarding nuclear technology. And in return, its actual vision was that it will provide training to scientists, and then in return, their respective countries will buy reactors and other things from America, because then they would like to develop nuclear power in their own country. So the real motive behind this Atoms for Peace program was to earn money. And through this program, a lot of countries benefited, including South Korea, Japan, Argentina, and to some extent even India. So it was through this program that Iran was also able to get access to the Western technology when it came to nuclear capacity, nuclear power. In 1957, Iran signed an agreement with the United States regarding nuclear cooperation. And in 1967, US had gifted, or US had given its first reactor, nuclear reactor, to Iran, Iran's first nuclear reactor. It was a 5 megawatt reactor, which is there even today within the compound of University of Tehran. It's in working condition. And all this started from that time. And yesterday I had explained that in 1953, the Shah was placed in power by the Western countries, and Shah was very pro-Western. He was ready to do anything and everything to please the United States and Western powers. So this was also part of that. Now, Iranian scientists trained in the US institutions under this program right from the 60s and 70s. But in 1975, a group of 35 students went to the United States under this program. They went to MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is considered one of the world's most premier institution when it comes to learning about new technology. And they went to study nuclear technology. Out of those 35, only three, it is said, returned to Iran, because by the time they completed their course, the Islamic Revolution had taken place, and most of them preferred to stay back, and they were able to get good jobs in various organizations which were working in the field of nuclear technology. So most of them stayed back in the US, or some of them went to work in countries like Canada and other European countries. But three scientists returned, who later went on to lay the foundation of what became the Iran nuclear program. So in 1968, Iran signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, committing to peaceful nuclear use. So Iran wanted to develop nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, mainly for power generation, and to get isotopes for medicine as well as for agricultural use. 1974, Shah announced plans for up to 20 nuclear power plants across Iran to diversify energy and reduce dependence on oil. Now, Iran was a very small country at that point of time in terms of population, and 20 nuclear reactors were totally unnecessary. That was the general view of the people of Iran. Second thing, as I had explained in yesterday's session, Iran was self-sufficient in terms of energy. There was no requirement to build nuclear power plants. So this was seen as an attempt by the Western countries to just loot Iran financially by making it do things and develop projects which were totally unwarranted. 1975, as I told you earlier, 35 Iranian students were sent to MIT at the expense of Iranian government. This was all funded by the Iranian government under the Shah. and they were supposed to study in MIT and come back to Iran and work in the field of nuclear technology to help Iran develop its own capacity in terms of nuclear power. But only three returned later, and most of them stayed back in US or went on to work in Canada and in other Western countries. And as I told you earlier, that most of these nuclear power plants, they were being developed with the help of Western companies and Western government. For example, the Bushehr nuclear power plant was being developed with the cooperation of Siemens, which is a German giant. They were working to build two 1200 megawatt nuclear reactors. Then Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center, planned as a hub for nuclear training and fuel cycle research, supported by French and German cooperation. Then Karaj Nuclear Research Center, focused on agricultural and medical isotope applications. However, all this changed completely with the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The Shah was overthrown. The reins of power came in the hands of Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the Grand Ayatollah, the main Islamic cleric at that point of time. And he was not really in favor of developing nuclear power. As I told you, everybody in Iran used to think that it was unnecessary. Second thing is, in principle, he was opposed even to weapons of mass destruction, that it's anti-Islamic. That was his view. However, what happened in the subsequent years completely changed Iran's way of looking at nuclear technology and nuclear weapons. In 1980, it was invaded by Saddam Hussein, an absolutely unwarranted kind of a conflict that was. Iran had not done anything to make Iraq invaded. It was an invasion carried out at the behest of Western powers as well as the other Arab neighbors. And not only that, as the war progressed, Iran realized that it was totally dependent on others for the supply of weaponry. Plus, a chemical attack had taken place at a place called Halabja. If you read about it, you will understand. Saddam Hussein's own cousin was involved in initiating that attack. And those were the moments which helped Iran realize that it really needs to work on advancement of weapons technology. And that's when it started working and started looking for options to develop nuclear weapons. The second event in history which really made it realize that it needs to work very urgently on this was the 1991 Gulf War. In 1991, the Western countries formed a coalition and they invaded Iraq. Now, of course, Saddam Hussein was at fault. He had first invaded Kuwait, and the coalition which was formed in response was in response to that invasion. So it was really Saddam Hussein at fault. But what Iran was able to see was that Saddam Hussein was always on good terms with the Western countries. He was, in fact, more like a lapdog of the Western countries. And if he can be destroyed so badly by the very people who had created him, then Iran, of course, was a known adversary. It was not on good terms with Western countries. It was not even on good terms with its other Arab neighbors. We'll study about it in the subsequent sessions. So it realized that it really badly needs to have some strong deterrence for its future protection. And that's when it started pursuing nuclear weapons very, very aggressively. And it started searching for someone who can supply technology, who can supply the material needed in order to develop nuclear weapons. And guess who helped Iran in that? Our great neighbor, Pakistan's main nuclear scientist, AQ Khan, Abdul Qadir Khan, who is credited by Pakistan with, giving Pakistan its nuclear weapons. Now, mid 80s, Iran sought centrifuge technology abroad after its nuclear program stalled post revolution and during the Iran Iraq war. And in 1987, AQ Khan's secret underground network provided that necessary help. AQ Khan had worked at a company called Urenco in Europe for many, many years. Urenco, even today, happens to have nearly 29% share in the global uranium enrichment business and supplies enriched uranium for peaceful purposes to more than 15 countries. It's headquartered in London and has facilities and operations in many countries like Germany, Netherlands, UK, as well as United States. So his tenure there, his experience working in that company had helped him develop contacts with lot of important reliable suppliers of equipments and everything that is needed to develop and enrich uranium. So he was very well versed with this entire ecosystem, and he used those contacts and his knowledge and everything that he could help with to help Iran get the P1 centrifuge designs, components, and technical drawings. Iran was able to acquire it, and Iranians are very nice, smart, intelligent people. They researched further based on those designs and developed more advanced centrifuges. Now, what is a centrifuge? You need to understand a centrifuge looks more like a cylinder. It looks like a cylinder, but then it is able to revolve at the rates of around anywhere between 50,000 to 1 lakh per minute. 50,000 to 1 lakh revolutions per minute. Developing that technology is not easy, okay, and not many countries know how to do it. That's why centrifuge is at the core of nuclear technology. If you know how to make a centrifuge, how to build it, how to design it, you will be able to enrich uranium very easily and very nicely progress in the field of nuclear technology. Now, this is Abdul Qadir Khan. Now, here you will be able to see how the centrifuges are. That is President Ahmadinejad. He was the president of Iran between 2005 to 2013. That is when he really threatened everyone that he will go ahead and make a nuclear weapon. He was a hardliner. Now, this is how a centrifuge looks like. Now, what are its general dimensions? For example, the P1 centrifuge, it is one of the older models. Nowadays, there are much more advanced models. Its length was around 2 meters, just about the height of an adult person. The diameter was around 10 to 12 centimeters. The weight was around 50 to 70 kg. Material, it was made up of aluminium rotor and 50,000 to 60,000 revolutions per minute. That was its capacity. However, the modern latest centrifuges which have been developed, it is said that they can revolve at the rate of around 90,000 or even 1 lakh revolutions per minute. So technology has progressed in a major way. AQ Khan, as I told you earlier, had worked for many years at this European company called Urenco. It was founded in 1970. It is headquartered in London. 33% stake in this company is of the UK government, 33% is of the Dutch government, and the remaining is of German business entities. And it has facilities in Germany, Netherlands, UK, and USA, and has around 29% of the global enrichment market as of 2011, and provides enriched uranium to nuclear power plants in about 15 countries, purely for peaceful purpose. So his years there had helped him develop good contacts with many suppliers working in the field of nuclear technology, and he used those to get all the necessary equipment and components and spares to help Iran develop its own uranium enrichment capacity. Which companies played a key role in this secret, supply chain? Liebold of Germany supplied vacuum pumps and related equipment. Watt of Switzerland provided vacuum valves used in centrifuge systems. Then Balzers, that is of Liechtenstein, known for supplying vacuum technology. Degussa of Germany, involved in supplying miraging steel and other specialty metals. And other German and Swiss subcontractors provided precision bearings, bellows, and measuring instruments. Now, when this whole thing came to light, most of these companies were had legal action against them. Some of them paid penalties. Some of them, were able to legally protect themselves by saying that what the equipment which they had supplied was of dual use, and they had no knowledge that it was going to be used for enriching uranium for making nuclear weapons. Then 2000s, early 2000s, Iran began manufacturing its own centrifuge components domestically, but the foundation was built on Khan's European supply chain. Now, how it all came to light, Iran was secretly working on enriching uranium for weapons at one facility, in fact, that was Natanz. And at Iraq, it had developed a secret facility which was related to heavy water production, which eventually helps you develop plutonium, which again you can use to develop a nuclear weapon. So, this whole secret mission got revealed in the year 2002 when two Iranian opposition groups in exile got to know about this, and they had conducted a press conference in Washington, D.C., telling the whole world about this secret Iranian plan and a work which was already in progress. The National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, an exiled opposition coalition, and its affiliate Mujahideen-e-Khalq, MEK, held a press conference in Washington, D.C. on 14th August 2002 and told the world about uranium enrichment happening at Natanz and about the heavy water facility at Arak. Iran had not disclosed this to the outside world. Iran was a signatory to NPT, because of which it was required that Iran allow IAEA inspectors to come and inspect its nuclear facilities. Till this time, 2002, it had declared only the nuclear enrichment happening at Bushehr, that too for peaceful purpose. Iran had disclosed only about a Bushehr nuclear plant to IAEA till that time. So in February 2003, IAEA begins inspections and finds undeclared nuclear activity. So it got confirmed that this news about Natanz and Arak was true. More importantly, they were able to discover traces of uranium which was enriched till around 36%. Now, what is this 36%? What is 90%? What is 3%? I'll help you understand in a while. For now, just to help you understand, any enrichment beyond 3 to 5% is a sign that the country is heading towards nuclear weapons. If you want to use uranium for electricity production or any other civilian purpose, 3 to 5% enriched uranium is more than enough. That level of enrichment is adequate. Plus, it requires a lot of extra expenses, a lot of financial investment, and advanced technology that is needed to enrich uranium beyond that. So if you are really putting in that much of money and that much of an effort to enrich uranium beyond 5%, it is a clear proof that your actual intention is to develop a nuclear weapon. So at Natanz, the IAEA inspectors were able to find traces of uranium, which was enriched till around 36%. That was a clear proof that Iran's intention was to develop a nuclear weapon. October 2003, Iran started negotiations, or international negotiations started with UK, France, and Germany. Iran agreed to suspend enrichment temporarily and sign additional protocols for IAEA inspectors. But then later, the IAEA inspectors, they complained that Iran was not completely disclosing all the nuclear activities. In 2005, Iran resumed enrichment after Mahmoud Ahmadinejad became president. He was a hardliner. He was hell-bent on ensuring that Iran would develop a nuclear weapon. He stayed in power for 8 years till around 2013. And during that time, things became very, very difficult for the international negotiators because he was not ready to relent. Now, this is Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. 2004-2005 talks continue but break down when Iran resumes enrichment in 2005 after Ahmadinejad's election. February 2006, IAEA refers Iran's nuclear file to the UN Security Council, and that is when the United Nations placed sanctions. And that is when Iran's economy started suffering in a very bad manner. June 2006, first official meeting of the P5 plus one. P5, the 5 members of the Permanent Council, Security Council of the United Nations, and one was Germany. So they started very aggressive negotiations with Iran because it was really concerning. Enrichment going beyond 20% was very concerning. So they started negotiations in a very aggressive manner in Vienna. But still, things were not progressing in any major way. Between 2007 to 2010, Iran expanded centrifuge installations at Natanz and began working at the underground enrichment site at Fordo. So it aggressively started working towards developing a nuclear weapon. In 2012, IAEA reported that Iran has enriched uranium up to 20% of U-235, raising concerns about weapons potential. But the good thing was in 2013, Hassan Rouhani became the president of Iran, and he was a moderate. He was not a hardliner, and he was very, very concerned about the state of economy of Iran and the effect the United Nations sanctions were having on Iran. He wanted his country to have relief from that, and that's why he adopted a completely different policy, and he started the negotiations with the P5+1 in a very positive manner, which eventually resulted in the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, getting signed in the year 2015. This is Hassan Rouhani. And November 2013, Iran plus P5+1, that is the 5 permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany, signed the Joint Plan of Action, not Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, Joint Plan of Action in Geneva. And on July 14, 2015, final Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was signed in Vienna. There were a lot of terms under this plan. For example, under this plan, Iran agreed not to enrich uranium beyond 3.67%. Amongst other things, it was supposed to disable a certain number of centrifuges. There were a lot of other terms. And one of the important terms was that Iran at any point of time will not have more than 130 tons of heavy water. Okay, now comes Donald Trump in the picture. He got elected to office in 2017, and he was vehemently opposing this JCPOA. Now, what were his main objections? 5 main objections. First thing was this whole agreement, this JCPOA, was for just around 10 to 15 years. Most of its terms were for 10 to 15 years, and he said that after these 10 to 15 years are over, Iran will again start pursuing nuclear weapons and will develop a nuclear weapon. So the first objection was terms are only for 10 to 15 years. Second was there was no discussion about ballistic missiles in JCPOA. Iran's main strength, as we saw in the last few days, was its ballistic missile technology. The only defense, the only thing which it has used very effectively against Israel, against its neighbors, and against the US assets in the region has been the ballistic missiles arsenal that it has. So there was no mention about ballistic missiles. If Iran continues working on ballistic missiles, which it had already developed very nicely, then in the next few years, it will develop a technology to even equip one of these missiles with a nuclear weapon and launch it towards its neighbors or towards any other country. So the second concern was with ballistic missiles not being a part of the JCPOA. Third was regional destabilization. Iran supports a lot of regional militant outfits, or you can say armed outfits. For instance, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, Hamas. It has always very strongly supported these organizations, not just financially, but even with weapons and training. And that was not addressed in JCPOA. Trump always said that it could have been used, JCPOA could have been used to pressurize Iran to do something about that as well. Fourth was that Trump always said that Iran cannot be trusted. It will not comply with all the terms. And one particular thing that happened in late 2016 and early 2017, Iran exceeded 130 tons, the level of heavy water it was supposed to maintain. It exceeded that, although it disclosed it voluntarily to the IAEA and even shipped the excess heavy water, that means whatever it had above 130 tons, to Oman for storage and resale. So it complied, it was within compliance, but Trump used it to say that Iran cannot be trusted. Sanctions relief, he said that, the sanctions relief which has been given to Iran because of JCPOA, it will use that money just to further develop its weapons technology. So these were the 5 main objections. As I was telling you, the deal limited Iran to 130 metric tons of heavy water used as a moderator in certain nuclear reactors. Any excess had to be sold or shipped abroad, and it complied. November 2006, IAEA reported Iran's stockpile was slightly above 130 tons. Iran later shipped the excess to Oman. And February 2017, same thing happened, and Iran did the same thing. It shipped the excess heavy water to Oman. So it was within compliance. Now, Trump uses these events as an argument that Iran cannot be trusted, it always cheats. And citing all these things, Trump withdrew. That means he made the United States government withdraw from this JCPOA in May of 2018, saying that this will generate maximum pressure on Iran. Now, are these the real concerns that Trump has, or is he using just as all this as a pretext to withdraw from the JCPOA? What are the real reasons? Experts internationally say that the real reason is something else. The real reason why Trump is always so anti-Iran and so pro-Israel, like all U.S. presidents have always been extremely pro-Israel. That is because of the muscle, the financial muscle, and the political muscle the Jewish lobby has in the United States. The Jewish community is just around 3% of the United States population. But in terms of the control they have over the US economy, in terms of the money they have in their pockets, that's absolutely disproportionate to the percentage of population that they are. So they wield a lot of power in the United States political scenario. Trump was heavily funded by big Jewish businessmen. For instance, the Adelson family, heavy Jewish funding he had. For instance, the casino magnate Sheldon Adelson and his wife Miriam Adelson had donated heavily for his first as well as second campaign. In the first campaign, when he became president in 2017, that donated 25 million. And in the second campaign, $100 million. 100 million is equivalent to around 930 crore Indian rupees. Just imagine just one person, one family donating such a huge amount. Then Isaac Perlmutter, he's another Jewish businessman. He had donated 5 million in the first campaign and around 3,71,800 in the second campaign. This might look like a small amount, but as an individual donor, it's huge. Then you have another example of Bernard Marcus, another Jewish businessman of the United States. In the first campaign, he had donated 7 million US dollars, and in the second campaign, he had donated 20 million US dollars. Now, all these businessmen are Jewish and they're extremely pro-Israel, hardliners, you can say, Zionists. What are these Zionists? Why Israel is so much against Iran, we'll study in the subsequent sessions. But Israel's whole vision has been that only we will have nuclear weapons so that we can threaten all our neighbors and nobody else in the neighborhood should have nuclear weapon. In 1981, it had attacked the Osirak nuclear facility of Iraq when Iraq was working on developing nuclear technology and destroyed it completely in an air raid. That was on 7 June 1981. And that's why knowing the capacity Iran has in terms of the intellectual level of its population, the education level of its population, that it has the capacity to develop nuclear weapon the way India had, and India successfully developed it in spite of being a poor country, because the level of education was very good. We are intellectually very good in terms of the way we study, the way we learn new technology, and the way we work on it, and the way we develop. In fact, we were also under sanctions, and nobody was ready to help us with space technology and missile technology. And that's when APJ Abdul Kalam, so he helped us, develop missile without aid of any Western country. That's why we respect him so much. So that is the thing here. And that was all about Trump's involvement. We'll study this in more detail when we study Israel's involvement in this conflict and also the whole Israel-Palestine conflict in the subsequent sessions. Now, very, very important for you to understand, whenever you will discuss about nuclear weapons, about Iran's conflict, the IO interviewing officer, the GTO, they will know you will talk about uranium enrichment. And this is the perfect opportunity for them to understand whether you are just one of those thousands of candidates who really talks about things but knows nothing about them when asked questions, or you really have a healthy curiosity and you love to study things in detail, in depth. So now I'll help you understand what is this uranium enrichment and how it matters when it comes to developing nuclear weapons. So it's a 6-step process of uranium being discovered in Mother Earth, and from there going up to developing the uranium pellets which are used in weaponry. Okay. So this is what uranium looks like in Mother Earth when extracted from Mother Earth in its totally raw form, uranium ore. Now, you'll be surprised to know that in this uranium ore, the amount of uranium is just around 0.1 to 0.2%. Just 0.1 to 0.2%. Exceptional cases are there. For example, in Canada, Athabasca Basin, from there, the uranium which comes, that has around, uranium ore which comes, that has around 20% uranium. So what we are required to do is, after the ore is extracted, there's a lot of processing, a lot of chemical treatment that is done to extract uranium, and the end result is what is called a yellow cake. It's a yellowish kind of a powder, a cake, you can say. And in that, there is around 70 to 90% uranium oxide, uranium, in normal language. This is what the yellow powder, yellow cake looks like. It is called yellow cake in scientific terminology. And then after that, yellow cake is converted into uranium hexafluoride by mixing it with hydrofluoric acid. This uranium hexafluoride is in a gaseous state. And then this gaseous state, this gas is then funneled into the centrifuge, and the centrifuge revolves at around 50,000 to 1 lakh rounds per minute. And due to the centrifugal force which is generated, uranium 235, which is more lighter compared to uranium 238, gets concentrated in the center, and uranium 238 moves towards the outer side. And after that, the uranium 235 is suctioned out. So that is how the separation takes place. UF6 is volatile and can exist as a gas at relatively low temperatures, which is essential for isotope separation in centrifuges. This is where the role of centrifuge comes in, and this is the main complicated process. This, if you can get this right, you can enrich uranium, you can even develop a nuclear weapon. So this is what the cascade of the centrifuges looks like. Now, enrichment, your centrifuge process, UF6 gas is fed into cascades of centrifuges. The lighter isotope U35 concentrates slightly towards the center, while heavier U38 moves outward. Enriched UF6, which has a higher percentage of uranium 235, is collected. And after that, it is made to react with steam or water to form what is called uranyl fluoride. And then this uranyl fluoride is chemically reduced, often with hydrogen, to form uranium oxide. And this is the main thing needed. Okay, this uranium oxide powder, it's slightly blackish in color. This is what the powder looks like. And from this powder, we make pellets, which you are able to see in this picture. And those pellets are then used. Pellet fabrication. Powder pressing. UO2 powder is pressed into small cylindrical shapes. Then pellets are heated at very high temperatures of around 1700 degrees Celsius to make them dense and ceramic-like. Then pellets are ground to precise dimensions about the size of fingertip. This is what pellets look like. Okay, uranium oxide powder. This is what pellets look like. And loading. Pellets are stacked inside long tubes made of zirconium alloy. Tubes are sealed to form fuel rods. Fuel rods are grouped into assemblies ready to be loaded into a nuclear reactor. Now, most important, 20% enrichment, 100% enrichment, 3% enrichment. How do you explain it to an IO? Now look at this pellet. Okay, let's say each of this pellet is of around 100 grams. Okay, and in each of these pellets there are, let's say, 1000 atoms of uranium. Please understand this concept. I'm talking about 1000 atoms of uranium, not 1000 grams of uranium. So let's say in this particular pellet, if there are 1000 atoms of uranium, and out of those 1000 atoms, if 200 atoms are of uranium 235 and the remaining 800 are of uranium 238, then we will say that it is 20% enriched uranium. If out of those 1000 atoms of uranium, if let's say 300 are uranium 235 and 700 are uranium 238, we will say that this pellet or this uranium is 30% enriched. So that is what enrichment is. Okay, so that's how you explain it. For weapons, especially nuclear weapons, it is said you need to have enriched uranium, which is enriched up to around 90%. So that is a very complex process. Okay, so that is what enrichment is, and that is at the core of all this nuclear weapons related discussions internationally. So that's all for today. That brings us to the end of today's session. I'm sure you must have found it very useful. Please like this video and share it with everyone whom you know will benefit from this. Share it in all your groups which are related to SSB. Encourage everyone to subscribe to our channel to watch more useful content like this in the future as well. Please don't forget to watch our videos in the Psychology Foundation course playlist. Those are 15 days recordings of actual classes, so you can watch those. Plus, watch the videos in the personal interview playlist as well. It will help you a lot in preparation of personal interview. On Monday, we will study the next aspect related to this issue, that is the Saudi role. I'll see you on Monday. Till then, please take very good care of yourself and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye-bye.